So I did a video last week about expected goals, XG, and how you could use it when you're trading on Betfair. And I sort of skirted over the top of the topic and had a few comments about could I do another video on XG. So that's what I'm going to do in this video. Yeah, so the first thing is, thank you for the likes and comments, and I know I always ask for them, as I just have, but it's important because when you do that, it gives me some feedback and tells me stuff that you're interested in. So the more likes I get on a video, then the more of those videos I'll do, and I'll obviously put a few other videos in and around other content, but it does give me a good steer in terms of what videos you're interested in, and I read all of the comments, and when I look at videos that have been popular, then I'll tend to produce more of those. So please keep on liking, commenting and all of those things, because that is really helpful. But yeah, after doing the XG video last week, there were quite a few comments I got on that. So I thought I'd follow up with a little bit more depth in terms of what XG is, how it can help you with your trading on Betfair and in your football trading in general, and when perhaps you shouldn't use it, and some of the good things about it and some of the bad things about it. So one of the comments I received was, how accurate is it? So what I actually did is I went off and looked at all of the stats that we have had from the last match that we last looked at, all the way back over the last season and beyond. And when you look at the number of goals that were likely to be scored, then the number of goals on average per match more or less match what XG has been forecasting. Now, it's important to understand that XG models do vary between different companies and different analysts and so on. They may have different weightings slightly based upon a number of things. But more or less there was almost an exact match. So if we look at the difference between in goals between the home and away teams, it was 0.39 over the period that we were analysing. And if you look at XG, it was 0.37. So you can see it's very, very close. And of course, goals does not equal XG. XG is the percentage chance of scoring from a certain position, whereas a goal is that shot actually went in. But to highlight a couple of little things for you, you can look at the matches that took place last night, and you can see a difference in terms of the way that you would use XG within a match itself. So I'm just checking where I've got the back here. Yeah. So if you look at the matches from last night, we had a couple of interesting situations that developed that would skew the way that you interpret XG. So Wayne Rooney scored from his own half last night. Now, if you replay and have a look at that goal, which I'm unable to do on this video, you'll have to find it and replay it. What you'll notice is that the goalkeeper goes to clear the ball, makes a bit of a hash of it. The ball ends up with Rooney in his own half, and admittedly it was a great strike, but he did shoot into an empty net. So if you look at a lot of XG models on that particular match, they were ranking the chance of scoring from that distance as virtually zero. 0.01 was what the model that I've got threw up. But of course that didn't take account of the fact that there was no goalkeeper in the goal. And so of course you're bound to be much more likely to score if there is no goalkeeper in the goal. I think that goes without saying, really, doesn't it? So a lot of XG models were a bit skewed last night because of that. So I think that sort of shows that it's useful to have statistics, but you shouldn't necessarily blindly follow them. Because when you look at the output from a lot of the models that came out the following morning, very few people had adjusted or accounted for the fact that there was no goalkeeper in the goal at the moment at which the ball was struck. Now, I couldn't score from the halfway line, let alone my own half, but a professional footballer is probably quite likely to get the ball quite close or on target at that particular point. And the shot itself was pretty good. It was hit quite hard, very firmly, and it was towards the middle of the goal, and it was lofted over the players. So was the chance high of scoring a goal? Not particularly, but it certainly wasn't as low as 0.01. So I think that that's why it's helpful to watch a match as well, because you can get a feel for it. Typically the way I use statistics is, even if you're just watching a horse race pre-off, most definitely in play, or a tennis match in play, or a football match, I tend to find that you do get a much better feel for it. But having a feel for it isn't good enough on its own in my book. What you need to do is you actually need to watch the sports that you're trading, but then you need to be able to quantify it as well, or at least make an attempt to quantify it. So if you're watching a tennis match, you can see the momentum swing backwards and forwards, but when you've got the stats to back up what's going on, that will help you. Because very, very often what you'll find is that you'll get a certain feeling for something, but in fact the stats don't back that up. So Manchester City were playing Southampton last night. Southampton played pretty well, I have to say, even though that's going to be a biased opinion. But if you actually look at the number of shots that Manchester United had, they had 26 shots, which was an awful lot of shots, and 12 of them were on target. And yet the score ended up 2-1, and Southampton only had 2 shots on target, and they only had 6 shots. Now, if you read those stats, so this goes back to where we started last week, which is if you look at the total number of shots, that can give you a guide, but it doesn't give you the detail. So this is a great example. Wayne Rooney was a good example of where XG sort of got it slightly wrong, but this is an example of where XG gets it absolutely right. Because if you look at the number of shots that they had and the number of shots that were on target, those are very high numbers, so perhaps you'd expect Man City to absolutely whitewash Southampton. But if you're watching the match, you could see that that wasn't really taking place, and that in fact Southampton were playing pretty well. Now, I didn't trade it because I can't trade my own team, so impossible for me to get involved in that. But I could see from the setup that Southampton had that they were stopping a lot of dangerous attacks from Man City. So the team was set up to do that. Man City had a lot of possession. They had 74% possession. They were creating opportunities, but Southampton were limiting those opportunities to shots that were outside of the box or from unfavourable positions. So when you actually look at the XG of the match, you could actually see, if you plotted it from the number of shots taken and the chances, you could see both of them going up step by step, almost together. Now, unfortunately for Southampton, Sterling got a very late goal, which was totally undeserved, I must say. But you could actually see the progression through the match was not as skewed as the top level stats would have suggested. So the top level stats were suggesting that Man City were all over Southampton, which they sort of were. But it was a tactical decision on behalf of Southampton to play the game that sort of way. And they were looking for quality breaks, and Southampton actually pretty much matched the XG of Man City last night, because when they did get those opportunities, they were very high quality opportunities. And in fact, they hit the bar, missed from very close in, and if one of those had gone in, then the match would have had a different outcome. But when you look at the XG stats for Man City, you find that most of them were quite low XG shots. But if you added all of them up together, then you would actually see that both teams, one had a certain type of style which was generally attacking, one had a defensive style, and they were cancelling each other out. So you could see quite clearly through the match that that was what was happening. You could see it with your eyes, but that may have misled you because of the amount of shots that City had. But XG refined that and told you what the true balance between the two teams were. And that was actually pretty close, which was quite pleasing for me, but not so much for Man City fans. But if you look at other matches that are very one-sided, what you tend to find is that the XG, so if you plot the number of shots and the XG of each individual shot with a graph from 0 to 90, you'll see that the graph sort of gradually steps up like this. And if you've got a team that's dominant, then that XG keeps stepping up, and you can see that the massive gap appears between the two teams. Now, of course, in football, you could get a fluky goal, but generally that tells you that one side is very dominant, and your strategy should be biased towards that side. And likewise, if you look at a 0-0 draw, then if you plot the XG, then they may be creeping up at about the same rate, but the overall additive value of that, the sum of all those XG values, may actually be pretty low. So therefore it's sort of saying, well, these teams are evenly matched, but neither of them are likely to score, or it's unlikely to score. And it can be quite a good precursor for the total number of goals in the match and the way that it's biased to one team or the other. It's a much better measure than if you're just using outright shots. And when you compare that, of course, you're going to get slight anomalies, but the actual difference between the number of shots and the number of goals that comes through from XG is pretty, pretty good. You're not seeing a massive deviation. And in fact, if you look at the standard deviation of goals in a match, then the XG value, the standard deviation of XG value, is actually much, much lower. So that's telling you that, in fact, it's discounting more information into the market. It doesn't guarantee that what is going to happen will happen, but generally you find that XG presents a better view of exactly what's going on in the underlying market for the reasons that I've highlighted between Man City and also, you know, other types of matches. While the top level may be showing you one certain thing, XG gives you a much deeper discount in terms of the level of activity that's going on within the match and how that's likely to play out. So yeah, generally pretty accurate. Standard deviation is lower than the number of goals, so that's discounting better quality information. It's actually one of the ways I suggest you forecast everything, is that you have an opinion over here before the match starts. The match starts and your opinion is over there, so gradually the two of them should get adjusted until you get closer together. So it's generally incremental changes you make to change your opinion, rather than just saying, no, that's not going to work and I'm switching strategy. And XG gives you that, and that's typically why I tend to use it when I'm looking at football matches in play.